Amazing.
Okay. Our first item here, this might be a fairly brief meeting, but is it the update at the Fairbanks anaerobic digestion test. The lead on that would be Annie Corrigan usually, or maybe Margaret has been keeping track. Does anyone else, Annie Corrigan from NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab. Sean, you may have caught wind of this too. I'm not sure. But anyhow, does anybody have any updates about the Alaska? We talked about it last week a little bit. Does anyone have any updates on that?
I guess the reason, so I have met Meredith before and Annie. Meredith reached out Friday, kind of, the situation at the EPA, trying to turn the digesters on this summer. So they reached out to us as a potential funder. So kind of trying to figure out how to make that work. Potentially we can contract directly with NREL. But yeah, I was kind of hoping to have that conversation in the near future, so we can turn that stuff on. Sorry, yeah, Margaret. But yeah, so I have funds, but kind of given all of the funding situations, we would like to maybe have some of our fish waste added to those digesters, but if that's not possible, then we're just trying to find a way to make sure those digesters start digesting this summer.
Yeah, the question was startup and then how to do startup, and we had some back and forth, me and Annie and what's his name, Jaime, about good startup ways to start it up. And I think there's what, 4 or 5 digesters there. So potentially, you could do different comparisons, but I don't really know the setup. So I hope that some of your fish waste can go through there, or that could be a supplement or something else. So that would be pretty cool to be able to include it at the ratios that you would potentially be seeing in your almost like a bench test of what you have for feedstock. So I hope that works out. Thank you for being open to it.
I missed the last few meetings. I've just been flat out here. I just wanted to ask, so if I'm remembering correctly, we were going to see the digesters with material from the wastewater treatment plant in Anchorage, or in Fairbanks? Is that correct? Is that where the plan still, or we don't know?
I think they were going to seed it with a lagoon, like
okay,
like an anaerobic wastewater lagoon. That's my recollection.
Yeah.
Say again, please. They were gonna seed it with what?
An anaerobic wastewater lagoon.
And that's part of the municipal treatment plant in Fairbanks, right?
No, I thought it was a Talkeetna specifically was the one we were looking at, as I recall. But yeah, facultative lagoon, sludge at the bottom.
Yeah.
Facultative. Wow. So basically the bottom dwelling stuff is what you want?
Probably pretty anaerobic, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be cool to get some fish waste in one of them, because I mean, that would obviously be a major source of waste for the indigenous communities in Alaska.
When I worked in Alaska at a cannery in Kodiak, they had a unit there that dried the fish waste for pet food or something. So I don't know how they did that, but that was a pathway that they used there, processing mostly salmon, but some halibut and some crab. Anything else on the pilot? Oh, and we have coming in Dan Smith. Dan, can you We're just talking about on the agenda here, we have two items, the Fairbanks pilot anaerobic digester through NREL, EPA, and now potentially Alaska Energy Authority. Then we're going to move into fish processing waste with Sean leading that discussion. So Dan, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I'm late. I'm Dan Smith. I'm the state energy coordinator for USDA Rural Development. And I've periodically popped in on these calls. Unfortunately, a lot of the programs that USDA has, or at least the ones that I work with, aren't really for research and development, but this is a topic area of mine that's of personal interest to me. So I just like keeping my finger on the pulse. And I work with Sean on the Alaska biofuels and biomass working group calls. So mostly here to just listen.
Thanks. Yeah. We'll get there. I think we're going to have like 20 or 50 small digesters coming in for REAP applications for the deadline in July 1st.
Yeah,
Just
yeah. So it just as a
kidding.
reminder, it opens up July 1st, and then the deadline will be September 30th. And in a perfect world, it'll probably be a month or two after that. It's probably about mid-November before a decision is made on which project's being selected. The state of the REAP grants right now is that no states have any allocations to work with. Everything's being competed nationally until further notice.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a whole ecosystem for people who don't work with it to try to understand. But I have a fairly good handle on it after all these years. So I appreciate that. And I do hope that we'll have some projects coming in, small digester projects. We just got one here in Vermont that's almost through permitting. So that's another story. But
Oh, perfect.
anyhow, yeah.
Yeah,
All right, good.
I will point out real quick that biofuels and biomass does align with the presidential executive orders, relating to energy. Biomass and biofuels was specifically called out in the definitions. So just something for us to keep in our back pocket. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Sorry, those were specifically mentioned as things that were looking at being supported or expanded.
Yeah, I'll see if I can link to it. It's it was the executive order that came out declaring a national energy emergency. The definitions, I'll put it in the chat here. The definitions, if you scroll down to, where is it? Section 8 towards the bottom of that page, energy is defined as biofuels. So it's specifically called out in there.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So if you wanted to say that anaerobic digestion biofuels, supports presidential directives following this January 20th executive order, Section 8, subsection A, under definitions, energy is biofuels. So that's where we're at. So
that's great. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, of course.
To close the loop on something we were talking about right before you came in, the plan is for 50% inoculum from the bottom of Talkeetna's facultative lagoon in our test digesters. So that's like 250 miles south of Fairbanks, Alaska. And then the other 50% would be our synthetic feces. And then, so I should say 25% lagoon sludge, 25% fake feces, and then the other 50% in each barrel would be water.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I guess it's my turn.
Yeah, we're ready for your presentation.
All right, so I'm going to start this
Whatever
by
you got.
saying I'm not a chemist, so this is where it's going to be important. So a little about me. I have a undergrad in systems engineering from West Point, and then I am 3 weeks away from finishing my MBA at UW. And so that's my educational background. But moving into, biofuels is kind of just falling under the purview of my program, which, as I said before, historically is focused on community scale wood heating projects. Dan briefly mentioned the Wood Energy Development Task Group, which I lead along with the Forest Service, trying to develop community scale wood heating projects in Alaska. So our efforts in renewable fuels kind of started a couple years ago, right around when I started, and the governor was looking at what to do with all of our quote unquote biomass. So fast forward to late last year, Alaska DOT is pursuing sustainable aviation fuel using trees, woody biomass as the feedstock. In some of their analyses, they've identified a smaller market with fish waste. So it's regionally dependent. Around that same time, we had the community of Unalaska and a handful of seafood processors reach out to us, talking and asking about like, hey, what are we going to do? Can we do anything on this side? So we kind of have a nice confluence of community interest. So Unalaska has a big big footprint for the processors. And right now they discharge their stick water, new term I learned yesterday. This is the byproduct of, processing fish oil and then fish meal. So not super sure on what the actual compound, like what's in it, but brief Google searches kind of shown it's some, lipids, some proteins. But outside of that, not really sure. But what it's doing is it's kind of destroying their local habitat. While it's EPA, it's passed, it's okay by the EPA. The community has said like, before the processors moved in, they used to be able to grab king crab literally off the beach. Right now that it's kind of like a ecological dead zone because it's creating algal blooms and nitrogen spikes in the water, and that's something I've seen actually in Cordova from like salmon processors where like they're just discharging the waste right into the water. So that's one aspect. The seafood processors are facing ESG goals from their wholesale suppliers, so they're looking to reduce their footprint. We've kind of figured the best way, or one of a way to reduce their footprint, their carbon footprint, is to tackle their fuel supply. So without having to kind of overhaul all of their power generation, all of their diesel for their boats, the best way to do that would be through a renewable diesel. So, this has been over the course of almost a year now. We've kind of been just meeting with industry stakeholders, like learning what the community wants, what industry needs. And we've kind of settled on the route of anaerobic digestion. I have a friend who former classmate who works for Circularity Fuels. One of their feedstocks for creating SAF, which is similar to renewable diesel in the sense that it's just SAF is a little bit more refined. And one of their feedstocks could be biogas. So looking at what seafood processors have done in the past up here, we decided that anaerobic digestion might be the best way to process the waste of what's left. So not looking at cutting into any profits that might be from fish meal production for dog food and cat food, or fish oil from the supplement industry, but really figuring out what's left. And Unalaska has been so far the best location, given the huge amount of like cod, pollock, crab that don't really have a value added product after the fact, unlike salmon. So we thought that anaerobic digestion could be the best way, and that's kind of how we got here. And then maybe like a month ago, I reached out to Margaret because I found her name on an email because I've heard about this project. And I was like, hey, what do you know about anaerobic digestion? Because I really don't know anything. And then now I'm here. So still very early on in the the planning stages. You know, if grants continue on the schedule that they have been, big assumption on our part, but we would be targeting FY26 vehicle technology office funding opportunities. Unfortunately, we missed this year's window just because we weren't in a spot yet with the community to kind of pursue this, but I think we've trended in that direction. Community is pretty bought in. So hopefully we can make it happen with grant funds next year. But if not, you know, I think I do have some budget to maybe start some pilot anaerobic digestion. So very early on, and really just here to learn more and maybe ask you guys for advice and knowledge and best way to move forward. I'll get
Is,
off my soapbox.
is REAP a possible funding, or because it's a transportation fuel project, it would go, or is it too R&D kind of thing?
I think so. It's not, I don't know if I would call it R&D in the sense that it's not a new technology. I think that's kind of where we're going to
Yeah.
get most of our traction, is that it's not a new novel technology. But Dan and I have talked previously.
Yeah.
I think the way that it's currently structured is like the state / government will kind of fund the research and proof of concept side and be like, okay, here's the data. Industry can now come in potentially using a REAP grant to fund it. But yeah, Dan, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, and from a technology standpoint, I think it's, you know, it's a proven concept, and as long as all the equipment's commercially available, and the application of that technology is commercially viable, it fits under a REAP grant. But like Sean pointed out, having the state as the applicant, I don't think would fly, because the REAP program is, the intent of it is to help farmers and rural small businesses just lower their cost of operations. You know, so if you have, you know, like a village gas station, and they wanted to start doing biofuels, you know, and make their own fuels, then they could do that. Or if we had that refinery in, I think it's in Kiski, if they wanted to start branching into biofuels and other type of, you know, fuel products, then, you know, the I think it's Petrostar as the applicant, as long as they fit the bill for small business, they would be eligible. So it's really, and that's what it comes down to. It's just finding who is the eligible party, to achieve, you know, to be eligible. Um, and that's always been the challenge with the REAP grants, especially in groups like this where the concept is great. You know, the people who are working on the project are all willing and able, but just finding the eligibility and figuring out who would be the ultimate owner of the technology. And in chat, yeah, pretty much all of Alaska except for Anchorage. And we go by the Muni bounds. So, you know, I've had inquiries from native village of Eklutna, and unfortunately, because they're like right on the edge of the Muni bound, they don't fit. But yeah, if you're outside the municipality of Anchorage in Alaska, you're eligible. You know, we've done a lot in Fairbanks, a lot in Juneau. Well, not so much in Juneau, but Juneau would be eligible. But yeah, that's about it.
I think the only thing I'd add is we've kind of done a very rough feedstock analysis on kind of just general supply and demand. So, and I don't have my numbers right in front of me, but we estimate that the annual demand for diesel in the Unalaska region is 18.3 million gallons a year. And then we know rough estimates that there's over 1.5 billion pounds of waste from the processors that is currently dumped in the region. And then we recently discovered there's about another 66 million pounds of bycatch. And some of those are dead weight loss where, not dead weight loss. They're like contaminated samples where maybe some fuel entered fish holds in the processors, or before they even make it to the processors, so they can't, so they just get dumped. So we're trying to gather as much info, and then, you know, figuring out what our reliable feedstock would be, and then putting that into a digester. And I think the community was also interested in co-digesting their wastewater. And I think the only other consideration is weather. And as from what I know, I haven't been to Unalaska. It's further south than Anchorage, so it's a little bit more temperate. So the weather might not be as big of a problem. But again, I don't know really anything about anaerobic digesters.
Sean, I have a question. When you say dumped, does it go to landfill? Does it go over the side of the boat? What, like, because oftentimes we like waste collection to go into a digester is all, you know, is an issue as well. If we have all this tonnage, but it could be spread out in such a way that collecting it is challenging.
Yeah, that is something we've recognized that could be a huge problem. So one of the biggest processors is Trident, and they actually have a floating processor, which is off an island called Akutan. Trident's actually moving its operations to Unalaska. And from what I've been able to gather on Google Maps of just like where they are located, as from what I understand, they actually just have like pipes that go out from the processors and dump into where they're allowed to dump. And then same thing with like the Akutan floating processor. They just move that ship out to where they're allowed to dump, and then they just discharge. So the floating processor aspect might make it actually quite a bit easier to collect, when, you know, maybe we move to scale it up beyond the pilot and demonstration project. So, but yeah, that's something we've thought about, and you know, a small community might be easier to handle that co-location of waste and collection.
I have something. Sorry, I'm late, everybody. Good to see you. And hey, Sean, thanks for bringing this idea to the group. I think you're doing the right thing, because this is what I do, and I work. These folks have been really helpful on the pilot digester conversation. I did want to. One thing I was thinking about, I have been aware of this just for everyone else. Sean and I have talked before, so this is something kind of like an ongoing conversation we hope to support. For the Unalaska project specifically, I'm wondering if you've mentioned any seasonality to it. So if that fluctuation over the year is really like summer focused, or like 8 months of the year, there is fresh fish waste coming in. And then for the other months of the year, there's functionally nothing, like, or a very small fraction of it. I think that's an element worth bringing to the table. We've talked a lot about feeds, or whether that waste would need to be stored for what kind of feed schedule, and if it were like dumped all at once, just that element of the digestion. I would wonder if you could talk a little bit more on the fishing season and how that would relate to the digester potentially.
Yeah, that is still ongoing research, or at least from our side. We've connected with Fish and Game, and honestly, I could probably just Google it and figure out when those fishing seasons are. But we know that there's cod, pollock, and crab, and I think the crab might be able. I don't know. I will have to learn more. So again, very early in this, but yeah, I think the seasonality is going to be pretty critical to like large scale production, moving past just like a pilot project.
So this location, are we talking about this island way out on the archipelago? Or where is this? On
Yeah,
Alaska? In the Aleutian Islands?
it is. Yep.
Okay,
I'm gonna
It's Dutch
see.
Harbor.
It's like where my kind of like, it's like right over here, and we're up here. So yeah, it's pretty far out on the supply chain side of things. But you know, if we got to move diesel that far, those routes already exist. There's maritime routes, there's air routes. So yeah, it's, you know, this is still very much early on the development side. But you know, we know there's a demand, so
Define pilot. So 'cause
Yeah.
that can mean that can mean all kinds of things. Like, are you gonna get some of this? What I'm envisioning is like chum, basically, from like, or fish byproduct or stick water, and take it to a lab and do a biomethane potential test? Or are we talking about like co-digestion pilots? Or are we talking about a little setup like NREL has? So what is the kind of scale that you guys are starting to look at for this kind of stuff?
yeah. So great questions. I've kind of in my mind, and it's sort of written out loosely. The first two phases of this whole renewable diesel production, phase one would be a pilot in a lab. And that was something I learned when talking with Eric from NREL. Like, I did not know you can do anaerobic digestion in a lab setting. So yesterday I actually spoke with McCussion Bay, and they own one of the laboratories in Alaska, and they were open to supporting a project. But I told them I frankly don't know what size or how much space a small scale, like lab scale pilot, with the intent of knowing like what the best microbes are for digestion, like if there's anything that we need to do to the feedstock before it goes into the digester, and then getting the gas profile coming off of it, because I know that's critical for biofuels, or sorry, like renewable diesel production.
Yeah.
So that is pilot scale for the anaerobic side. Then kind of demonstration scale is something larger. Again, I honestly have no idea how much input we need on the biogas side to produce renewable diesel. And that's a conversation I still need to have with some renewable diesel manufacturers. Like, how much do they need to, you know, support their smallest production line? And then maybe backwards planning off of that, like, okay, then how big of a digester do we need? And then how much feedstock do we need? So again, still very early in the planning as we gather as much information as possible to have an informed and arguably good grant application. And if not a grant, then funding it some other way. Because I think there's enough pressure from the state to pursue this that we might be able to get some state dollars. For example, the DOT, they had a grant through the FAA. That grant is up in the air still. So the state just decided, hey, we're going to move forward with this, and they're funding it all with state dollars. So if we've kind of determined that there is enough of a supply for feedstock in the Unalaska region, then maybe we can get the state to pay for it. So again, very early, all ideas, but just trying to build out a plan.
Definitely want to defer to the other people here, but I have a few more questions. Maybe that'll also spur thoughts. I'm thinking if we're starting pretty small, Sean, we've discussed kind of like that composition analysis, which could vary depending which processor we're working with. And I'm thinking there are multiple processors there, and that kind of whose waste is a key part of it. And what you said about pre-processing would probably impact the downstream, like biogas production. So do you have a likelihood of this, like, have you targeted this processor or that processor and this waste? Because we're not starting at the full scale, we'd be starting at the small scale. So it's sort of which selection is our best chance or more realistic selection? What's the approach?
Yeah, so we've Unicy and Trident have been the ones that have engaged with us the most. Trident has a fleet, Unicy does not. So Trident, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, not reflecting, either of those organizations, probably has the best or most vested interest in getting a renewable diesel supply, just because it'll fund or it could offset some of the costs of their fleet operations, especially since they have that floating processor in Accutan, whereas Unicy, they do run diesel gensets during the processor season, but they do not own a fishing fleet. So just on a cost estimate, I suspect Trident would be the one who we could get the supply from. They'd be the most willing to work with us. They've actually responded when we last spoke with Eric. I mentioned, hey, like there's a chance we could do this. Like, could you send a sample? So I just had that email conversation. Still waiting on a response from Danny, but we started talking about timing. Like they haven't started processing yet, so it's like, what makes sense, and can we get the sample out from Unalaska to wherever it needs to go? And that kind of spurred my conversation yesterday with McCushin Bay Labs. And I was like, hey, well, if it doesn't need to fly out, like, can we do an anaerobic digester, like super small scale in the lab, so we can literally just take the sample and block it to the lab? So I think Trident is likely our best candidate for supply.
Okay, that's good to know. Have you thought about decoupling, or at least, having multiple scenarios where decoupling the supply with demand? Sorry, I mean supply in terms of providing the fish waste, and then demand in terms of wanting biodiesel ultimately, where it might sound like different processors, like if it's their waste product, then you might have more like, sure, we're not getting any value add out of this.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah. On the surface level, Unicy said they'd be interested in purchasing it for their diesel gen sets, but I honestly, I think we won't know enough if like their price sensitivity to purchasing renewable diesel, if like that would be enough of an offset for their carbon emissions to pay a premium. But honestly, I don't know what our cost is going to be until we can kind of determine scale, because that'll really be the cost driver. I think I think they're paying upwards of $4 a gallon for diesel right now. So honestly, if we can get it lower than that, that would be huge. But I don't know how much this would cost.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, so when it comes to the economics, it sounds like, what the manufacturing cost will be is going to drive the price, and that's how you drive the demand, right? So where I'm going with this is, once you get through the proof of concept and have established that it works, rural development, I'm putting 3 programs in the chat. First one is the biorefinery manufacturing assistance program. Then we've got, once you have the manufacturing up and running, then there's advanced biofuel payment program, which is kind of like a subsidy. I'm not too familiar with it. We haven't really used it up here. And then there's the Bio-Based Markets and Development Access Grant, BDAP. And that one is to, really, once everything's up and running, kind of expand the marketing, and maybe broker a deal with like PetroStar that you could tap into some of their distribution, and just really keep pushing where you're marketing this fuel to. So yeah, those are all programs for us to keep in our, just keep in mind that USDA has programs for getting the refinery up at a commercial scale. we might not be there yet, but I just wanted to, it seemed like this is a good time to mention it to this group. Just something to keep in the back of our heads. Thank you.
Good stuff. It's early days, and so knowing about those things now is important. Because as Dan says, like once you have it working, then there's these other opportunities. So just to know about them now is really great.
Yeah, and all those programs, they are not currently open. Well, okay, the last one is open. But the other two, the last windows were, the last window closed in October of last year and then in April of this year. So they have come around pretty regularly. They are funded under the Farm Bill, which is currently being renewed by Congress. I can't really lobby Congress, but I'm just pointing out that they're working on it right now. So if y'all wanted to say something about it, there you go. I'm just going to stop talking right now. Thank you.
So potentially those programs would come around again. Both of the first two would come around in November, possibly, or I guess it depends on how the Farm Bill.
It all depends on the Farm Bill. Even the REAP funding right now, because the IRA funding that was plussed up with REAP, or that REAP got plussed up with, is on hold right now. But we still have the REAP Farm Bill funds available, and it's dependent. The future of that is dependent on what's in the next version of the Farm Bill, whether it's in there, what levels it'll be funded at. Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, it's kind of where I'm at. We're at. So I guess this work is kind of under AEA's roof, but it's also kind of under the Alaska Clean Cities and Communities Coalition roof. Where all of us are working under what we've called the Alaska Biofuels Advisory Group, which started off supporting DOT on their SAF venture. With, I think they've decided on woody biomass. So there's that, but then AEA kind of leading the efforts on identifying that smaller market for renewable diesel in the Alaska region. So yep, still very early on. Potentially, if funding goes away from the federal side, exploring public private partnerships for funding. I think we're gonna have to get pretty creative on funding these next few years. So I think we are, since we're a public corporation in the state, we do have a little bit more flexibility than just a typical state organization. But yeah, just trying to build a viable project, and then maybe get some funding along the way. But that's all I have, unless there's any more questions or ideas, comments that you guys think might be helpful. And then if not, I'll get off my soapbox and we can continue on with the agenda.
Well, the agenda is any other news at this point. And I can give you some teasers about future agendas that I've been working on. Thank you, Emily, Embray. Talk through pilot options. One idea about pilot I thought was, if these people, Circularity Associates or whoever that was that you mentioned, are working on or have the biogas to renewable diesel pathway figured out, then you could send them a sample of biogas and do the lab scale thing on that as well. Or maybe, as far as they're concerned, biogas is biogas and they can take pretty much any crap and turn it into RD. So anyhow, I just had that thought on lab testing, because you need both, right? You need to know that how the digestion is going to work on this feedstock, and then you're going to need to know how the pathway to RD works too. Anyhow, that was my little add-on stuff. Embray, thank you. not to speak for Jane, but she's cool. Okay.
I volunteered Jane to field questions. Well, and Annie, of course, because Annie's in the throes of it. But on the lab stuff and the BMPs and what gas characterization, methane content, that kind of stuff. That's just
See,
hard.
Sean, this is how we roll. It's just all people volunteering each other. Okay. Anything else? Any other news? Ring around the rosy or around the horn or whatever. Mike, McCarroll, how do you say it? Anything to add? Otherwise, I'll just give you a hint of what our future agendas are shaping up to be.
I will chime in real quick, Alex. I not sure. I think there was some talk about seating, but Margaret's not here today, so you have not heard the latest in Fairbanks.
Well, I did send you my little notes that what we talked about here, that Sean might help fund it, and that you're going to seed it with Talkeetna, 25% bottom dwelling, 25% synthetic feces, 50% water. That's all we
Okay.
kind of talked about. Yeah.
There's an important, so the note about Sean helping funding it, that's, one of many, but potentially separate conversations. Right now, I wanted to let everyone know, unfortunately, we're not launching this month. We're currently at no-go at NREL because we are short on funding to finish the job. The EPA had been, like Margaret and Max had both been looking for loading more funds onto our existing interagency agreement this year and had been working on the back end to make sure we would have enough to we have enough to load the digesters as planned this month, but then they need to be maintained and monitored and data collected and learn something from it, and then ultimately decommissioned. And so we have a process at NREL before the switch turns, where anyone, it's essentially, are we prepared for all contingencies? And with the budget that we currently have, we aren't able to responsibly bring that risk on site if we don't have funds to support people's time or do the appropriate decommissioning. So until we have funds in hand that can guarantee that there isn't going to be a waste left on site unattended, we're not able to actually launch right now. It's a pretty hard update to share after I've been talking with you all for so long, and we've been really excited about this.
Yeah, the moose are not going to do the maintenance, even though you have moose. I mean, maybe you could put them on a treadmill and then they would generate electricity. Okay. Anyhow, it's rough. I'm sorry to hear it, but yeah, it makes sense. If you can't fund the whole thing, then you can't really start it.
You're not going to abandon the group though, Annie. You're still part of this group and you're still going to come, right? And we're still going to figure out ways to help. And Jane, I don't guess we've heard anything from NATO.
Nothing.
Yeah.
I just checked the application right now and it's at the same status it's been for the last 2 months.
Okay.
I wonder if we could impose on Robin to just knock on a door.
Yeah. Well, and I did see your comment, Embry, in the chat about EPA's Office of Research and Development. So I was able to talk with Max and Margaret last week. But yeah, things are grim in their agency. And Max, the ORD holds the agreement with NREL at this time, rather than Margaret's at the regional office. So Margaret's at Region 10 EPA. And so the dynamics there are different than at the Office of Research and Development, but Research and Development actually holds our contract. So there is a whole bunch of ideas if we were to unfreeze this, unfreeze that, approval that, because their staff is being set to reduce by, I don't know, there might be 10% of them left here soon. So that was just another real disappointing turn of events this month. And we here have kind of assessed the situation so that we're not launching right now, but conversations around okay, if this doesn't happen in the next month, then we've missed our peak season for running the experiment. we talked about this last year, but we are going to look for funding and just starting fresh, starting with as much as we need to accomplish the job. Max and ORD had been responsible for the analysis and reporting. So even if we were to collect data at NREL, if we didn't do anything with it and learn something, that would be a shame. So I think what we're going to do is I'll keep talking with you all and maybe bring some ideas as I workshop applications for what will be another restart of the project. We are starting with a good bit of information and a really clear project plan. So maybe that has something going for us, but instead of just band-aiding the solution and trying to do it on a shoestring, we're gonna clear the slate, I think, based off of where we're at now, and keep it here and think about next summer. And maybe it means that it gives us the opportunity, depending on that, on what we go for or who we partner with, to add other elements to the project and expand the analysis in-house at NREL.
Annie, could you remind us again, because you're a federal entity, if there's any limitations on funding? Because I know that did come up on the NATO application. There was some the EPA couldn't take any of NATO's money, right? In that firewall. So is there anything, because you are an American federal agency, that you cannot take funding from? Do you have any restrictions?
So I'll correct the confusing language. We are government owned, but contractor operated.
Okay.
So I'm not a federal employee.
Okay, you're like NCAR. Yeah. All right. So there's no restrictions on your funding.
Sometimes there's a different set of contracts we need to use depending on where funding is coming from. So that might change terms and conditions, etc. But there is not the same set of policies attached to a federal agency as with NREL.
The point being that NREL could potentially take money from NATO through that funding source.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I'd need to look at exactly the NATO specific stuff, but I feel there is a pathway for that. Yeah.
Just so that all of us who are gonna go try and figure out how to fund this can think of it, can you give us a scale of the shortfall that would be needed to turn this into a go instead of a no-go?
Sure. So in the beginning of the annual year, Max, Margaret, and I were looking for $50,000 to get through what we had scoped. With adding on the analysis, we're looking for more like 80 to 90 in total if we're starting fresh, and including what we need to get done. We can expand the scope and go up if there are opportunities from there, but I think that is our minimum.
Would it be possible within the boundaries of the contract to have analysis done by volunteers in this group?
I think that is a good question. Technically, I mean, under the project that has been operating, it's EPA's determination. And I don't think there's any, I'm not sure if there's ownership of the data and distribution of it, but the way we've been operating with this group has been, it's on a voluntary basis. So if Margaret has, has thus far volunteered access to all the design process, et cetera, I don't think there's anything explicitly against that. A positive. I don't think, and until if we were to discuss patents or any sort of controlled information, then that would be a different story. But the whole premise of the design process has been not patenting any design, because we want to make it low cost, accessible, something that remote Alaskans could benefit from if this were to be a proven system, and there could be adaptations on it. So I don't really see that as being a holdup.
Okay.
I don't want to speak for EPA, but we have run into this on other projects where EPA very explicitly as a public entity promulgates data, right? There's nothing proprietary about this. This is for the benefit of, humanity, and there's not, they're not generally, patenting or holding data close to their chest on this kind of stuff. So, Nate, you want to unpack who's got a lab in their backyard to run total nitrogen samples? Like, what are you thinking? Does Corolla?
No, yeah, I know that's
lab.
no, and that because that's the bulk of the cost for the analysis. I mean, like when it comes to like once you have data, doing something with it, I think, happy to volunteer my time for that. Probably small businesses like a lab in Fairbanks is not really looking for pro bono work right now. So, and I know that Mount Everest Biogas Project is somewhere around less than $30,000. So I can't just advocate that we dump it all over and sort it out, which is good because I would make that ask and probably get shut down by my board of 4 people at this point. So, okay. I'm so sorry, Annie. We have all put a lot of effort into this, and I know that you have especially. So, want to make it happen, and we have to do it in a smart way so that it's not effort wasted.
I appreciate that, Nate.
I mean, on this, go ahead, Sean, then I have something.
I was just gonna say, that 80 grand might not be out of the question for AEA. Kind of pending how I have 2 federal awards with the Forest Service right now, and I have match requirements, and if those don't get funded, then I'm gonna have match or cash available to match or to use in contractual agreements. So if this summer is gone, or depending on how fast you can start up, I'm expecting to hear back from the Forest Service. Was told June 1st, expected not June 1st, sometime probably August is likely when we get notified. But willing to, explore it. I think it would kind of be a hard sell for my org to just be like, here's 80 grand. But I don't know if it's going to violate the contract agreement between the EPA and all of the nuances that we would need to navigate. But like having it somehow be beneficial for what we're trying to do, and beyond just my program, like I know maybe some communities could benefit from biogas for power generation. And again, I am just speaking from the top of my head, like scale and ideas. So I think maybe we could revisit that open contract with NREL discussion with Audrey, and maybe we can figure out a way to make it happen with state dollars.
Thanks, Sean. I would love to talk more. And it sounds like the timeline is setting ourselves up again for success for real next summer.
Yeah, so we still haven't heard anything from NATO. Who knows what's going to happen with that. I am planning to apply, or hoping to apply, for another grant that would basically be looking at like the microbial functions and like process performance of kind of like remote small scale sanitation systems like septic tanks and anaerobic digesters, potentially lagoons, that kind of thing. So if we get funding through that, that's also a way to have a grad student do the analysis. You can also send us samples that could be part of the analysis, like paid by the grant as well, that kind of thing. So I know that doesn't pay for the operations, but it could at least like cover some of the ongoing costs.
Awesome. Good to know, Jane. You're in the application process now for that.
Yeah, so I think they're not due till November, so we'd find out in like March if we got them. Keitano, and I don't know if you guys know Keitano, he's a professor at University of Victoria, does a lot of work on sanitation. We would know at the end of March if we got the grant, basically. But we also have some funding for grad students, like that work on sanitation systems. in general.
Okay, great. And I guess to add on for all of your awareness, to operate, I do have, we'll have some interns on site this summer, one of which she was excited about helping with the sampling and digestion process. So I think he'll be involved in thinking through what's our background, what's our pitch forward, what could we learn from this, what would be our like list of priorities, etc. So maybe I will let kind of him, I'll gauge his interest. He hasn't started yet, but will at the end of the month. So we'll have some active brains working on a plan. And if there are kind of more of these branch off ideas that could come together, he'll be involved in actively shepherding what the research questions could look like.
And I'll bring up this kind of issue with Tim Leach from Launch Alaska, who's the acting director of the Clean Cities Coalition. So maybe we can kind of ask that broader org if anyone has or would be willing to at least contribute some cash towards operations. Because again, I think in my opinion, it falls under Clean Cities, you know, like wastewater, potentially having a fuel come off of it, or you know, something to help communities. So I think there could be a way forward there also. So I'll reach out, and I'm actually meeting with him after this. So I'll let you know if there's any traction there.
Thanks. I guess that makes me think I should also add one of the existing, I could say it's a support mechanism. We did at one point talk about a small business innovation research project to complement the digester. It involves a chiller attached, not because we were going to attach a chiller here on site for this pilot, but to understand the outputs of what a pilot digester could do, and if the biogas were used to, say, power a small chiller, if it's seasonally operating, that could be a food storage option paired with the digester in the future. So that is a group that's innovating the chiller side of things and what it could be powered by. And I haven't ironed out exactly how our existing agreement with them, now that the experiment isn't running, will look like, but that's just another piece in play for the biogas utilization.
Are those digesters, I guess, who owns them? Is that NREL, or were they funded by the EPA, so they kind of have the custodial responsibility on them?
The things on site are NREL assets.
So hypothetically, like if you know a different funding source were to come in that was slightly off of scope of what the EPA was trying to do, you guys would still be able to operate those if it was a slight deviation from the initial EPA project?
Yeah, we'll still need to have some ongoing conversations with Max and Margaret about what closing out, if there isn't going to be more funds available through our current agreement, what closing out looks like. So essentially at that point, ideas start fresh with what we have, if that answers your question.
It does. Yeah, thank you.
All the scope, I mean, this is related to what you just said about the scope and the funding. And to what Nate was saying about possibly getting others to do it, some of this work somehow, even just as we think about what is the funding needed, can you, Annie, put into the Google Drive anything you have about what's the scope, you know, how did you budget to get to the 50 or the 80 or the 90? I'm going to put this link in the chat for our Google Drive, or if you have some other way you want to do it, I don't really care. But I'm just going to throw that in here. Yeah, I hope that works. So if there's anything you want to throw in there, then maybe we can look at that and, you know, drop some of this stuff into a funding application or find somebody to do some of the work or something. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the link.
If I'd have known I mean, I don't know if IWA you know, it's next gen, so I don't know how they would view digesters, but I mean, gosh, I'm sorry, if the applications are due tomorrow, but maybe next time. No, I mean,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
how do you do that? It is the Gates Foundation, and I talked to the Gates Foundation at the last IWA World Water Congress, and they were like, we don't like anaerobic digestion.
Huh.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, they want to put in a miniature supercritical water oxidation system in people's houses, and I was like, how is that from a maintenance perspective versus an anaerobic digester? Could you please unpack that for me? But they don't want to deal with things that are alive. They think that that's more challenging. However, that doesn't mean that we're going to, I don't know. So because it's funded by Gates, the IWA thing, it may not be. But it would have been a long shot anyway. But
Well, it's good to know that take, Embry, because it definitely was I can't remember. I've been through a lot of lists of where could we get more help.
you know,
And someone had mentioned the Gates Foundation. I hadn't looked that deeply into it yet. But that's a nice hot take.
yeah, they're like, we're done with it.
I kind of just have a general question. Do you have any like resources for like the uninitiated, like just on basics of, I understand how the digesters work, but like, let's say I'm trying to figure out the yield of biogas that we could get from a potential feedstock. Are there any like best practices or like resources that are like tools just for estimating? Because I opened the Google Drive, and are those just like 55-gallon drums that the digesters are in, or that you guys are using? And it's like what is the yield from like input material to gas output, if that makes sense? Like in percentage base of mass, or I don't know. I guess I'm just still trying to learn more.
Yeah, some rules of thumb. I
100
don't have them, but they exist. And the actual getting a real, it's important to bench test the stuff. Even then, it's not going to tell you big picture what you're gonna get. These specific methane yield bench tests are fine as far as they go, but you can't finance a project based on a bench test. At least that's what I'm told. I'll send you what I have on specific methane yields of all kinds of combinations with several tests on some of them. It's based on manure, but with manure with lots of other stuff. So it's kind of interesting just to see variation. I think there might be some fish waste in there. There's certainly lots of things that have oil that were co-digested. So let me just send you that. It gives you a sense of the range of yields for a lot of different feedstocks. In fact, I'll put it in the Google Drive.
Thank you. And then kind of last broad question, is there kind of like a decrease in yield as the digesters get bigger? So like how large can digesters be on like a commercial scale?
millions of
Millions of gallons? Okay.
Yeah, millions of gallons.
And then do you actually see better performance from larger scale digesters, or is it kind of linear as you scale up in volume? Is it kind of the same?
It's hard. I mean, it's a function of all kinds. I mean, Jane and Nate can weigh in. It's a function of all kinds of things, right?
Okay.
Usually there are rules of thumb for COD destroyed or volatile solids destroyed and that gram of volatile solids destroyed will give you this much biogas, right? But then the biogas itself is a percent methane and a percent CO2. So that'll vary also by feedstock. And so there's a lot of variability in that. And then you start talking about mixing of the digesters and how mixing will improve gas production because you're getting the bacteria in contact with all the food that they can convert to biogas. So there's a lot of different components that go into it, but we definitely have rules of thumb for, pounds of volatile solids reduced will give you this much gas. And so that's what Alex is saying. We do need to do waste characterization studies and do like bench scale to actually get a better handle on it. But of course, we've got, ranges for feedstocks. So like stuff like lignocellulosic feedstock, like cow manure, doesn't usually give you as much gas as like food waste, because there's a bunch of stuff in the cow manure that's like straw that the bacteria can't get at in the digester, whereas food waste is like octane, right? So it's really, there's a lot of different things that go into it, but we can definitely, in this group, we've got hordes of information about that kind of stuff. I'm looking at my Metcalf and Eddy right now to see if I can snap a picture and put it in the chat.
That's great. Yes, I never heard of it, but it sounds like some kind of Bible.
It is the
Okay,
Bible.
okay, that was sacrilege. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's the Bible. It's
chapter and verse. You got to give it to us. You got to give it to us. Amen.
Yeah. So, Jane probably has. Yeah, we've got.
I think it's on Jane's board there. I think I see some stuff right on the board back there.
We've got all kinds of yield data. So for sure.
And then the community had a question, and I spoke with Unalaska, and it's, what is the waste product of anaerobic digestion? Like, what is left in the digesters following, after it's all complete? And is that valuable, or is that toxic? And how can a rural community handle that, whatever's left?
So so just so you're clear, I'm extraordinarily biased for anaerobic digesters. Okay, just love them, right? So the stuff that comes out of anaerobic digesters, we have historically been land applying it as fertilizer. It is still got, around the United States generally, a lot of places will put it on the ground as fertilizer. It still has a lot of nitrogen in it. It still has a lot of phosphorus in it. What a digester does is help reduce the pathogen load. It helps stabilize it so that like flies don't want to, flies are not attracted by it, because all of that really kind of putrescible stuff has been chewed up in the digester. What people are very concerned about right now is like all of the personal care products and PFAS in particular that a digester will not touch, right? Nothing except setting it on fire is going to get rid of the PFAS right now. That's very general and very broad characterization. So it kind of depends on, we've got wastewater treatment plants here in Washington State. Their biosolids have tested positive for PFAS at extremely low levels, and they are still selling it, and the community doesn't care. And they're still selling it as a land application, like fertilizer for their yards. And people are like, but this stuff is awesome. It's great. It helps me grow my peas a lot better. And I'm getting more PFAS in my McDonald's burger wrapper than I am in my, 1 cubic yard of biosolids. So it kind of depends on your community and what's going on in the community with respect to their perceptions or their knowledge about what's, those sort of residual pharmaceuticals and personal care products that are still in biosolids when they come out. So it is an extremely valuable fertilizer, but a digester will not remove those kinds of constituents. Very generally speaking. Nate, Jane, did I speak out of turn?
I hope our fish don't have a whole lot of PFAS, but
Oh,
like it's everywhere now.
They'll have microplastics or PFAS or something in there that we're gonna have to deal with. It's entirely possible, but yeah, we've got communities, we've got entire states down here that will not land applied biosolids anymore, period, in the state at all because of PFAS. And we've got other places that are like, they're keeping an eye on it, they're monitoring it, but they're not going to categorically deny the land application disposal of it. So it's just kind of a range. But it is magnificent. It is full of nutrients, and that's why people like it.
Yeah, I'd say like Embry, I love garbage into gold. And so in our situation, it's wonderful fertilizer. You know, we have different, it's a little bit different. The digestate coming out, it still has all the nutrients. They're in a little bit different form. There's no loss. However, in your situation, you don't have a way to really land apply it, but you're hella better for not having pathogens and other fish killing stuff than you would otherwise be, I'm guessing. But you know, putting anything in to the water that has nutrients is probably going to cause a whole set of reactions that I can't speak to on a marine science basis. But that's a good question for them. Like, if we told you the feedstock is this and the digestate is that, how will it affect your marine life? You know, then you can put it back to them. But this would be really great information to have coming out of the bench test. What's in this stuff? What's the chemical oxygen demand after digestion, or the other factors that you'd look at if you were a marine scientist for how bad it is. So once you have that bench test, you can also get that same information. You can feed into the marine science people.
Yeah, because it is a function of what you put into the digester, right? So like for a marine discharge, we don't usually get our knickers in a twist about nitrogen. We do care about phosphorus. So if you have a high phosphorus concentration of of the feedstock going into the digester, you're still going to have that phosphorus coming out, and you're not going to want to dump that in the ocean, right? So like you do have to know what's going into your digester, and how it will convert, how it will change, if at all, to bioavailable forms or whatever, mineralized forms, and then figure out where you're going to have to chuck it. But these are all problems that we've all been working through for the last 100 years. So there's an answer. It's not an insurmountable problem. But characterization is key.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's good to learn, and I think the community would, in general, be on board with that, and potentially even sell it back into the market as a fertilizer. Yeah, it should be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But yeah, thanks for giving me my science lesson of the day.
Oh, this group will talk about poop all day long. All day.
Dan, do you want to chime in a last comment? I'm going to have to go here at the hours, but I want any wrap up?
Yeah. So looking into, what do we do with the feedstock? Yet again, we have a couple more
Oh,
USDA programs. First up is the Rural Business Development Grant. It would be for a village or local government hosting the anaerobic digester if they wanted to do a feasibility study on setting up a business plan or some type of incubation for a fertilizer selling business or a community garden or something like that. We'd have to workshop it definitely, but there could be something there. The other one is the illustrious fertilizer production expansion program. This one is closed. It's been closed for like 3 years now. And it's basically to just get the entire US away from just potash and more common fertilizer types. And I've looked into this program for various mariculture applications, kelp biostimulants, but if this program does open up again, and again, it's tied to the Farm Bill, mind you, if it does open up again, there might be an application tied to this type of project or program that could fit under, this funding source. So good old USDA. We've got a bunch of programs written down, but not enough funding to go around.
We still appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm gonna run here soon. I love talking with you all. Embry crushed the 101 stuff today. Thank you. Sean, we'll have a follow-up here soon, I think, maybe to talk structure, how to bring these ideas together in action in the coming months, maybe. So I'll talk to you again directly. And I think, Alex, anything, we'll otherwise have a chat in 2 weeks or?
Yeah, we'll have our next meeting. I've queued up, I hope, Judith Marichelle for her work up in wherever the hell it is, Hudson Bay, and on sanitation, possibly Greenland. So just getting her perspective on some issues needing to be solved and what she's learning this year in field work. Then I think maybe July is we're going to have Jaime on sort of an update on his work on weatherization and sanitation. So yeah, that's what's queued up on our next couple of agendas. And always give me ideas. Always put them out there. Me, Embry, or Margaret are the co-hosts here, and just always trying to get relevant stuff in front of people. I did put in the Google Drive a listing of substrate potentials or specific methane yield for all kinds of different feedstocks. It's all based on manure plus other things. Unfortunately, there's no fish waste in there. Metcalfinetti, I heard that Metcalfinetti is a Bible, so I'm sure Metcalfinetti has a good fish waste substrate potential. Just kidding. Whatever. Bench scale testing is what you got to end up doing. So thank you, everybody. Anything else? What does this mean by throwing stuff over the fence? What are we throwing? I hope we're not talking about feces again.
No, just like any resources or.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you. That kind of stuff is really helpful. All right. I guess over and out. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Yep. Thanks.
Yep. Take care.